They are not afraid of your anger. They are not afraid of your arguments or your words. What actually unsettles them is the version of you that no longer reacts the way they expect. The moment you become quiet in the right way, you do not lose power. You step into a space where you are no longer easy to influence or control. You might have seen this before. The second you stop explaining yourself, stop defending your actions, and stop reacting emotionally, people who once tried to push you around start acting different. They become uneasy, sometimes even confused. That is not random. That is human behavior and psychology at work. People who use toxic patterns do not depend on strength. They depend on access. Access to your emotions, your attention, your reactions, and your mental space. When you quietly remove that access, you become harder to handle than they expected. The control they once had starts slipping without them even realizing it. When you stop constantly explaining yourself, you also remove one of the main entry points they rely on, which is your desire to be understood at any cost. A lot of manipulation does not start with direct control. It begins when you feel the need to clarify everything, justify your actions, and prove your intentions. The more you talk, the more you try to explain, the more material they get to work with. Every extra sentence becomes something they can twist, question, or use to keep you engaged longer than necessary. What feels like honest communication to you feels like opportunity to them. Over-explaining often comes from a hidden belief that if you just find the right words, they will finally understand you and treat you fairly. But people who manipulate others are not confused about what you mean. They are often very aware. They are not listening to understand you fully. They are listening to find gaps, weak points, or emotional openings they can use to regain influence. So, when you reduce your explanations, you interrupt their pattern completely. You cut off the supply of information they rely on to keep control in the conversation. In this sense, silence is not weakness or avoidance. It is a conscious form of restraint. It sends a clear message without words. It shows that your decision or position does not need approval or constant justification. When you stop rushing to defend yourself or soften your choices with long explanations, you are basically saying, "This is final, and it is not up for debate." For someone who depends on emotional back and forth to stay in control, this is uncomfortable and frustrating for them. There is also a shift in how power is perceived. The person who talks too much, explains too much, or constantly defends themselves is often seen as the one seeking approval. On the other hand, the person who speaks less and stays calm is seen as more stable and self-assured. When you step out of the cycle of over-explaining, you change how you are viewed. You are no longer trying to convince them, you are simply stating, deciding, and moving forward. That change also affects how they behave toward you. They realize they cannot easily pull you into long emotional conversations anymore. At first, they might push harder. They might ask more questions, provoke reactions, or try different angles. But when those attempts stop producing detailed responses, their influence starts weakening. The interaction becomes shorter, simpler, and less emotionally rewarding for them. This does not mean you stop communicating completely. It means you stop giving unnecessary explanations to people who have shown they misuse them. You say what needs to be said once, clearly, and then you let your actions speak for themselves. Over time, this builds a strong boundary that does not need constant reinforcement through words. When you also avoid reacting immediately, you take back control of the pace of the interaction. Many toxic people rely on speed. They provoke quickly, push for instant responses, and create urgency because fast reactions are usually emotional reactions. The faster you respond, the less time you have to think, and the more likely you are to give them exactly what they want, which is raw emotion they can use or manipulate. When you slow down your response, you break that pattern. You create space between what happens and how you respond. In that space, your control exists. Instead of being pulled into their timing, you decide your own. That alone changes the entire dynamic. Now they are the ones waiting. Now they are unsure. Now they start questioning if their approach worked at all. That uncertainty is something they do not like. Manipulation depends heavily on predictable reactions. They say something, you respond in a certain way. When that cycle breaks, their sense of control weakens. They may try harder, send more messages, escalate emotionally, or switch tactics. But every attempt they make starts revealing their reliance on your immediate reaction. There is also a mental effect that comes with delayed responses. Silence creates pressure. It forces the other person to sit with what they said, sometimes longer than they intended. Without your quick reaction to guide or stabilize the interaction, they begin to question themselves. They might wonder if they went too far, if they were ignored, or if their message had any effect at all. That internal questioning shifts emotional pressure away from you and back onto them. Delaying your response is not about playing games or being passive-aggressive. It is about refusing to be rushed into emotional reactions. You choose when you respond and how you respond. Even a small pause can change your tone and clarity. Instead of reacting from impulse, you respond with intention. Over time, this trains the interaction. They stop expecting instant access to your attention. Another important shift happens when you maintain calm and steady eye contact in real-life situations. It sends a strong, non-verbal message. It shows presence without emotional instability. Many people who try to manipulate others rely on reading facial expressions and micro-reactions. They look for discomfort, hesitation, anger, or nervousness so they can adjust their behavior and regain control of the situation. When your expression stays calm and your eye contact does not break under pressure, they lose that source of information. They cannot easily read what is happening inside you. That uncertainty weakens their strategy. Most people unconsciously show small reactions when they feel pressured, but when you remain steady and neutral, you give them nothing to work with. Calm eye contact also changes the emotional tone of the interaction. It reduces chaos and slows things down. Manipulative behavior often feeds on fast emotional movement. Without visible reactions, the energy of the interaction drops. They may try to push harder, raise their voice, or shift tactics, but your stillness prevents the situation from escalating in their favor. Another effect is psychological adjustment. When one person stays calm, the other often begins to match that energy without realizing it. If they cannot provoke a reaction, they are forced either to calm down or become more obvious in their attempts. Either way, they lose the subtle control they were trying to maintain. This is not about intimidation or staring someone down. It is about being grounded enough that your presence does not give away emotional weakness. Over time, this kind of calm presence becomes difficult to disrupt because it does not offer emotional signals to exploit. A similar shift happens when you allow silence instead of rushing to fill it. Many people feel uncomfortable with silence, so they try to fix it quickly by talking, explaining, or softening the situation. Manipulative individuals rely on this reaction. They create tension or uncertainty, knowing that you will try to remove the discomfort. When you stop doing that, everything changes. Silence creates space, and that space creates pressure. The other person is left alone with their words and actions. They do not get the immediate comfort or response they expect. This makes them feel exposed. Responsibility in the conversation also shifts. Instead of you carrying the pressure to keep things smooth, they now have to decide whether to continue, explain themselves, or sit with the silence. Many people who use control tactics are not comfortable when that responsibility shifts back onto them. They may start over-talking, revealing more than intended, or contradicting themselves just to escape the discomfort. Silence also breaks emotional rhythm. Manipulation often works through fast exchanges and rising emotional intensity. Silence interrupts that flow. It removes momentum and weakens their ability to steer the interaction. What makes all of this powerful is that you are not attacking or arguing. You are simply not filling every gap. That restraint shows emotional independence. It shows that you are not dependent on their approval or constant engagement. Finally, when you walk away without drama, without long speeches, and without emotional explosions, you remove the payoff they expect. Many toxic dynamics rely on escalation. Loud arguments, emotional exits, or dramatic final words are often what they feed on. When you deny that ending, you take away their control over the outcome, and the interaction closes in a way they cannot shape or use anymore. A dramatic exit usually comes with explanations, blame, or a strong need to be understood. Even when it feels justified, it still keeps the interaction alive because it holds attention until the final moment. Walking away quietly does the opposite. It shows that the situation doesn't need performance, arguments, or validation. The decision has already been made internally, so nothing more needs to be proven outside. This creates a psychological gap that the other person is often not ready for. Instead of an emotional ending or heated final exchange, they are left with sudden silence. There is no closing speech, no reaction to respond to, and no last conversation to reshape the outcome. That lack of ending can feel more disturbing than conflict itself because it gives them no clear conclusion to process. They may replay the moment in their mind, trying to figure out what happened, because it didn't follow the pattern they expected. There is also a shift in how authority is perceived. The person who leaves calmly appears more certain and in control. The one left behind may appear reactive, especially if they try to re-engage after the other person has already stepped away. By not announcing your exit or turning it into a big emotional event, you avoid making it a shared performance. It becomes your decision alone, not something open for negotiation. Walking away without drama also protects your internal energy. Emotional exits often continue to drain you even after the moment ends because you tend to invest heavily in the final exchange. A quiet exit feels cleaner. It ends the situation without enlarging it, which allows you to move forward without carrying emotional residue. Over time, this behavior teaches others that access to you is not automatic, and that interactions will not always end in the way they expect or control. Without the dramatic closure they are used to, their ability to pull you back weakens, and silence itself becomes more powerful than any final words you could have said. When you ignore provocations, you remove the fuel that keeps unhealthy patterns active. Provocation is rarely random. It is usually designed to trigger a predictable response, such as anger, explanation, or emotional engagement. That reaction is the reward for the other person. It confirms that they still have access to your emotions and can influence your state. When you choose not to respond, the cycle breaks. From a behavioral perspective, this follows a very simple rule. Behavior that is not rewarded eventually weakens. If every attempt to provoke you is met with silence or neutral responses, there is no reinforcement left for that behavior. Over time, it loses its purpose because it no longer produces results. This becomes frustrating for someone who depends on reactions to feel in control or to maintain influence in the interaction. There is also an immediate psychological shift that happens in real time. When someone throws a sarcastic comment, insult, or subtle attack, and you do not respond, the emotional energy has nowhere to go. Instead of transferring tension onto you, it stays with them. They are left holding their own words without the feedback they expected. This can create discomfort, confusion, or even embarrassment because the usual emotional exchange is missing. Ignoring does not mean you are unaware of what is happening. It simply means you are choosing not to participate in that pattern. You are separating awareness from reaction. That separation is important because it allows you to stay calm without becoming passive. You remain in control of your behavior, but you do not give access to your emotional response. In many situations, the other person may escalate at first. Their attempts can become stronger or more direct as they test whether they can still trigger you. This is often the point where people fail, because the pressure to respond becomes stronger. However, consistent non-reaction sends a clear message. The tactic is no longer effective. Once this is understood, the intensity usually decreases or stops altogether. Another effect appears in how others observe the situation. When you consistently refuse to engage in provocations, people around begin to notice the difference. The person provoking may start to appear more unstable, emotional, or aggressive, while you appear steady and composed. Without saying anything, you influence how the entire interaction is interpreted. Ignoring provocations is not about shutting yourself down emotionally. It is about choosing where your attention goes. You decide what deserves a response and what does not. By refusing to participate in manipulation, you quietly remove one of the main tools that controlling behavior relies on. When you manage your facial expressions, you close one of the fastest ways people try to read and influence you. The face reveals information constantly. Small reactions like irritation, confusion, approval, or discomfort appear within fractions of a second. People who try to manipulate others often watch these signals closely. They do not always need words if your face already shows them what is working. The moment they detect a reaction, they learn where to push further. By keeping your expression calm and neutral, you interrupt that feedback system. They no longer receive immediate confirmation about the effect of their words. A sarcastic comment may be made, but no visible irritation appears. A subtle insult may land, but there is no emotional reaction shown. Without these signals, their confidence in their strategy starts to weaken because they cannot clearly see its impact. This is not about becoming emotionless or suppressing everything inside. It is about reducing involuntary reactions in situations where someone is actively trying to read you. Internally, you remain aware, but externally, you stay steady. That gap between feeling and expression creates control that is difficult for others to break. There is also a power shift involved. The person who shows less emotional reaction is often seen as more in control of the situation. A calm face suggests that you are not being influenced or disturbed. If the other person is showing frustration or intensity, the contrast becomes even more obvious. They appear reactive while you appear grounded. Over time, this changes how people approach you. If emotional tactics do not produce visible reactions, they either increase intensity or eventually reduce their effort. Both outcomes come from your consistency. One emotional reaction can reinforce their behavior, but steady neutrality teaches them that their approach does not work. It also affects how observers interpret the interaction. People generally trust the person who appears calm over the one who seems emotionally unstable in the moment. Without saying a word, your controlled expression shapes perception in your favor. Managing facial expressions is not about hiding who you are. It is about choosing when your emotions are visible. In situations where manipulation is present, that choice removes an important advantage from the other person. When you give short and neutral responses, you reduce the emotional space available in the interaction. People who try to manipulate situations often rely on expansion. They want conversations to grow longer because extended engagement gives them more opportunities to steer, influence, or extract emotional reactions. Detailed answers provide them more material to work with, and emotional tone gives direction to the exchange. Short responses change that structure. They acknowledge without inviting more depth. You are not ignoring the person completely, so it does not appear dismissive, but you are also not feeding the conversation with emotional or detailed content. This creates a kind of dead end where there is little left to build on. Neutrality is what makes this effective. A short reply with emotion still gives them something to analyze or react to, but when the tone is flat and controlled, interpretation becomes difficult. They cannot clearly tell your emotional position, which disrupts their ability to plan their next move. The balance of conversation also shifts. Instead of long back-and-forth exchanges where they try to dominate the flow, short responses reduce their control. If they continue, they end up doing most of the talking, which can sometimes lead them to reveal more than they intended. Over time, this becomes predictable. They realize that interaction with you does not produce the same emotional response or control they are used to. The experience feels less rewarding for them, which naturally reduces their effort. People tend to move away from interactions where their usual strategies no longer work. It also protects your energy. Long emotional exchanges, especially repetitive or manipulative ones, can be draining. Short and neutral responses allow you to stay present without becoming emotionally involved in the dynamic they are trying to create. This is not about being cold in every situation. It is about recognizing when someone is trying to pull you into a pattern and choosing a response that does not support that pattern. By limiting both emotional tone and message length, you quietly remove their leverage. In the end, none of these behaviors need to be loud or dramatic to work. In fact, their quiet nature is what makes them effective. People who rely on manipulation are often prepared for arguments, emotional reactions, and long explanations. That is the environment they understand. But when you step outside that pattern and remain calm, selective, and controlled, you remove the tools they depend on. Consistency is what matters most. One moment of silence is not enough to change everything, but repeated calm responses slowly shift the dynamic. You become less predictable in the ways they expect. You become less accessible in emotional terms. Over time, the balance shifts without any need for confrontation. This is not about defeating someone or proving superiority. It is about self-control and emotional independence. It is about deciding that your attention, energy, and emotional reactions are not freely available for others to trigger. From that position, you do